Meaghan, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
So Meaghan, what is OG MAGA?
So this is a phrase that I use for those that were part of the movement in 2015 into 2016. It's those of us who are kind of the original group who truly believed that President Trump, or then candidate Trump, was bringing something to the table that no one else was. It was this belief that there was a huge swath of America that had been left behind, but more importantly, we were just tired of losing. We were tired of feeling like we had to apologize for American greatness. We were tired of feeling like we were constraining American power. And what we wanted was just this kind of culture of winning again. And that doesn't always necessarily translate into policy, but it was more this idea that both kind of traditional sides of the left and right were willing to settle into this malaise, this belief that America was kind of on the decline, that we just needed to accept it and lean into it rather than say, wait a second, no, we actually are great and there's things that we can do to make it great again. Obviously, MAGA, which is why I consider myself that version of MAGA than what I feel like is currently emerging right now, which is a return to that belief that we were rebelling against, that we are somehow in decline and we should constrain ourselves, restrain ourselves, or restrict ourselves.
So there, as far as I can tell, there are several camps in the Republican Party. One is the group that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Another is maybe the more establishment Republicans. And then there are your adversaries who are either called non-interventionists or restrainers, mm-hmm. or some use the epithet isolationists.
Yes.
So let's tease this out a little bit. Mm-hmm. When Trump ran in 2016, and he gave his one foreign policy speech at the Mayflower Hotel.
That's right.
Which, by the way, was sponsored by the National Interest. Which,
I didn't know that.
Which I also edit. And I was one of the people who introduced Trump at that mm-hmm. event. And that was really, Trump pounded home the theme, America first. Now, and he talked about how elites had ruined the United States, mm-hmm. and that he was not going to return to the best and brightest, but find the most capable people for his administration. But he wasn't going to return to the tired elites. Mm-hmm. Now, isn't there, if we look at the realist or the restrainers, when they say that they embody the true Trump, are they wrong?
Yes,
Tell me why they're wrong.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely wrong. So I think there's a couple of things happening here. So first off, I think when the president has talked about the tired elites, it's actually something I deeply agree with, and I think many establishment Republicans agree with as well, which is that during the kind of 20 years of the global war on terror, you had the same kind of group of people talking, and this was left and right, by the way, kind of blob consensus around why we should stay, what we should do, and we were inherently bleeding America dry around those specific foreign engagements. Additionally, we were overloading ourselves with doing initiatives around the world that made zero sense for our safety and security. And I mean, you've seen kind of all of the horrific reporting coming out now about what we were doing at USAID. And by the way, I think there's a place in the world, everywhere in the world, for America power, soft and hard, to be projected. That isn't necessarily what was happening under a lot of what was going on at USAID. So you had this kind of encroachment of American dollars and experts trying to say we should do all of these things. And we were doing nothing well, even though we were everywhere. And so I think that was a necessary rejection of the status quo in 2016. Now, I will also say that I'm not someone that subscribes to the death of expertise. I think we have to have expertise in many of these places. And the way that things have always been done doesn't necessarily make them the right way. And I think you had to have a resounding rejection of all of that, almost like a burn it to the ground approach, in order for something else to emerge. Because I think doing it in half measures was just, it wasn't going to be enough. But to answer your question, why are the realists wrong? Well, most of the realists are part of the elite. They're just part of a different elite, if you will. And so they'll profess that they've been right all along. It's because their way has never been tried, but they're wrong. Their way has been tried. In particular, isolationism was pushed, especially in the 1930s, to horrible effect, obviously. So they're just a different type of elite that they want to now own this space where they say, well, we're not the elite, we're the right way to do things.
If there's a problem with the realists, and I think you'll probably agree with me, I think it's This idea that America is separated by an ocean and that nothing can affect us, everything's hunky-dory in the United States, right? Isn't that really the mindset?
Yeah, we can't be touched, but we know that that's completely inaccurate. Like, and so my favorite is like realists want to say that they live in the reality, except for they're completely divorced from it. And you just have to look at what happened under the previous administration with our border, how Chinese nationals were pouring across and having access to our military installations, how that was weaponized against. It didn't matter that we had two oceans because getting across these oceans is inherently easy in this atmosphere in this world now. And so the idea that we could just become Fortress America, if you will, is also made ludicrous by the fact that the president understands how strategic Greenland is because of the fact that Russia and China can utilize the Arctic to reach the homeland. So this idea that we can just hunker down and not worry about the rest of the world is on its face just completely false and ludicrous.
Greenland is, in fact, important.
Of course it is.
If you were advising President Trump this afternoon, what would you tell him to do?
So, I mean, here's the thing. I was actually, if we could acquire Greenland that was done in a way that preserved our alliances and our relationships, I would be all about it because there's no reason why we shouldn't pursue an acquirement policy. I do not think this is something that we should do by force, certainly, and certainly not at the expense of our necessary alliances in Europe. Europe remains our greatest trading partner. It remains our most kind of aligned moral Judeo-Christian, if you will, belief in the future of the West, partnerships that all exist with Europe. So Greenland shouldn't become that by which separates us from who we desperately need in Europe, especially considering if the Arctic is truly going to be the next competitive theater, which I believe in many ways it will be. We need the Nordic and the Baltic area in particular for that. So severing those alliances would be silly. However, it has been very clear that they haven't taken, and by they I mean Europe, NATO in particular, though, even though we're part of NATO, has not taken the strategic positioning of Greenland as seriously as we should have been. And so the president isn't wrong to lambast that. What I would tell him is that we need to pursue a policy, again, of potential acquirement, if not, then of basically competitive advancement of our policy and posture in Greenland in partnership with our allies, pushing them to fund more, but also ensuring that we're putting our money where our mouth is and we're putting potentially more boots on the ground there as well, which we are authorized to do under currently existing agreements.
That's a very good case for Greenland has become such a hot button issue, and it has damaged our relations to some extent, hasn't it, with Europe?
Yeah, it has. And I think it's unfortunate because I do not think it had to be that way. And this is sometimes where I really very much understand how the president uses rhetoric and how he uses deal making in order to get where he wants, right? He always overstates his case. It's very bombastic, very rhetorically heavy and laden in order to get where he actually wants to be. And that he's been very effective at that. It's a very effective deal making technique. Unfortunately, though, in this particular case, it was done in such a heavy-handed way that I think it caused way more distress than it needed to, because I think there was a genuine belief that we could take it by force. And as you and I both know, belief, especially when it comes to things like deterrence and alliance building, matters quite substantially. That psychological process does matter. And I just think that we perhaps overplayed our hand there.
Now, the administration has focused a lot of attention on South America and Latin America, the toppling of Maduro in Venezuela. Now, Secretary of State Rubio is upping the pressure on Cuba. Where do you think that's headed? Do you think it's headed to an actual military invasion, or are they hoping that they can craft some kind of a deal for a new government in Cuba?
I think the latter, but they're willing to do the former if need be. I mean, you are clearly saying, using the Monroe Doctrine, right, or the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that we should control our hemisphere. I mean, quite frankly, it is overdue. I mean, the reality is that Russia and China have attempted to project power into our hemisphere for a long period of time, and we didn't address it. One of the largest spy bases in the world is in Cuba. It's 90 miles off the coast of Florida, specifically targeting some of our major military installations that coordinate a bunch of efforts regarding intelligence gathering, trafficking, counter narcotics, cartel, all of that, and do work in Africa and Europe. And the fact that we were allowing that to occur without holding them accountable and responsible for that is negligent. And so I would say this is a very necessary recapturing of our power and projection in our hemisphere, which is long overdue. But I do think it's probably diplomacy first, and then if need be, I mean, listen, you saw what we did to Maduro. I would say we wouldn't do it again.
When I was in Okinawa years ago, and this gets back to, I visited the military installations there, and you see the American fighter jets taking off about every 20 seconds.
Yeah.
It's just like whoosh.
Yeah.
They're flying over to Russia or wherever for reconnaissance. And it's quite amazing. I mean, that makes you realize again the extent of our security commitments abroad. Are those commitments, do you think they are as strong as they've been in Asia, or do you think we are tempting the Chinese to attack or at least blockade Taiwan?
So I don't think we're tempting them to do anything in the same way that I think that that argument is like, well, NATO tempted Russia to invade Ukraine. They're planning to do it anyway, irrespective of what we're doing in the Pacific. The reality is we know that Chinese war plans look at taking Taiwan. I think that event horizon perhaps has shifted positively a little bit to the right, but they were going to do it anyway, irrespective of that. And so I think our responsibility is to build those strategic partnerships with greater intensity while also understanding what we do now, particularly in Europe and also the Middle East. And now that we've opened up that theater of operations, that matters for deterrence of what China will or will not do in Taiwan. And so it isn't necessarily about what we're doing in Indo-Pacific. I think right now it matters what we're doing in Europe and the Middle East for what China is perceiving.